Ready? Are you ready to do it?
Yeah, cool.
All right, Nina, here we go. So five, four, three, two, and one. All right, folks, welcome back. And I am thrilled to have back Dr. Nina Burrowes. Nina, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back.
You're welcome. So, Nina is a psychologist, author, and activist specializing in the psychology of sexual violence and relationship abuse. She's the author of The Courage to Be Me, an illustrated book about recovery from sexual abuse. Also, Eyes Open to Sexual Abuse, What Every Parent Needs to Know, and the creator of the online course, How Do People Heal from Trauma? As an educator, Nina is keen to bring the trauma literature to a wider audience using illustration, video, events, and even a game show to help people build their understanding of trauma, consent, and relationships. She has a lot of new things going on here, including Holding Circle, where we're going to talk about that, and Injustice Ceremonies for Survivors of Sexual Harm. We'll talk about each of those things. Nina, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Guy.
All right. So before we go in here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm originally from Hampshire, which is on the south coast of England. That is home. But last time I spoke to you, I was traveling. We had like a post-lockdown, let's travel moment. So that was 18 months of traveling around the UK and not knowing where we would end. And we are now at our ending. We found this
Oh,
beautiful town in Scotland. It's like right in the middle of Scotland. It's stunning. It's called Pitlochry. And this is where I'm speaking to you from tonight, from my little cabin in the garden.
wow, very cool. So for our listeners who maybe aren't too familiar, give us the thumb. How did all this start for you? How did you get into this?
Not by careful planning, I would say. I think by luck, by having a firm sense of maybe where I don't belong and like not being in those places. So I think I was set up. I did my PhD in forensic psychology, and I guess then you're on track to become an academic. But I knew that that wouldn't be a good fit for me.
Hmm.
So I wanted to do something that was very practical with those academic skills. And so I ended up getting a job at the prison service initially. But I was covering someone's maternity leave. So it was one of those jobs, it was a year. And afterwards they were like, if you were freelance, we have work for you. And so I started working for myself like very early in my career, as lots of people do, I guess, in this space. But I think I had less of a roadmap because I was like a freelance academic who had this practical lens. And I ended up following the topic area of sexual harm wherever it would take me. Initially, working with people who perpetrate harm, but then getting interested in the kind of the victim survivor side of that, and then really the public and juries and all of this stuff. I think Me Too probably happened
Hmm.
after I was already heavily into the work, and so since Me Too, then we work with universities, we work with colleges, employers. Like there's really these days there's no space we can't go into and say, hey, have you thought about consent, have you thought about sexual harassment, are you trauma informed?
Hmm.
And so I get
But
to be an educator.
what pulled you into the space in the first place? Because it's a heavy space.
It's really heavy, and I have to say my instinct wasn't attraction, it was aversion. um, I was offered a job. I wanted to work for the prison service, but I didn't choose the sex offender side of it. That was what the job was, and it was the only job they had. So I was like, okay, I'll try it. I think so. I never really chose it initially, but I definitely stayed, and that was a choice. As a psychologist, I just find it. I mean, it's fascinating and it's difficult, it's challenging, and like the amount of harm that is caused and the scale on which it is caused, like it is deeply meaningful. And I find actually it's a privilege And as I've developed in my career, you know what is we often talk all about vicarious trauma working in these spaces. I experience vicarious healing
Mm.
too. Like I feel like what my work has asked me to open my eyes to in service of others has been of huge benefit for me personally. So I'm mostly I feel like my work has been just a very generous gift as well, and I have every reason to stay.
I've never heard that term, vicarious healing. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it's I think it's true.
But you have a very interesting, unique uh, s slant on the work you do. You, for example, we talked about some of the books that you've done, illustrated books and so forth. Why do you, where does that come from? Why do you find meaning or importance in that particular perspective?
I'm really keen. As an academic, I had access to all of this information, important information about trauma. I mean, these days there's a lot, you can get information about trauma a lot more readily than you could 10 years ago. Um, and when it came to, before Me Too, before these bigger conversations, public conversations about sexual harm and its impacts, I just didn't see enough of sharing of that really useful information with the public. And when I got curious about it, also kind of understanding that not every academic has got that in their skill set or in their remit. Like the conventional career is one where you're teaching in universities, where you're writing these incredibly hard to read papers.
Right.
But the truth is, I mean, most of these jobs are funded by the public ultimately through one shape or another. And I always saw it that my job was to be of service to the people living with the issue. So I was really keen to do what I could to translate that material into formats that anyone could engage with, most especially the person who is, really questioning their own reactions and responses and their own mental well-being, and not equipped with enough of an understanding of what's really going on. And I feel like that kind of secondary harm stuff, that, not just what happened to you, but what happened afterwards.
Mm.
How were you helped to navigate that space? What were the stories you were told? And all of that stuff. That's huge. So it's been my privilege to try and create stuff that people can like. I use cartooning a lot. I think a cartoon is really like, it's like wholesome. Like you kind of have to
Mhm.
get to the essence of what you're talking about, and you can use humor. And I think that's important. It can be important.
So recently, you, I don't know if you just started doing it, but it sounds like you're introducing your work to the public in terms of circle work.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. How did that come about? Why is this meaningful to you?
I think I've been personally looking for Circle for a really long time. I felt I was in this position where I was working for myself, and I felt the lack of colleagues. Like I really felt a desire to connect with peers in group spaces, and I didn't want to go through a PowerPoint presentation with them. I wanted to like connect with them in a way that felt I was looking for a deeper connection. I always thought the ideal would be around a fire, like uh, I think that's a kind of metaphor, but it evokes something in me that makes sense to me anyway. Um, and I feel like I was looking for Circle before I knew Circle existed.
Hmm.
I had this kind of sense, and then yeah, eventually, it was through work. I was educating myself around ethnicity and race. And in the book I was reading, it was actually recommended if you're going to come together in groups to discuss whiteness and to discuss ethnicity, then you might want to check out Circle. Um, and yeah, then I started reading, educating myself, getting some training myself in how to hold these spaces. And in lockdown, one of the things we started to do was to hold circle for staff working in rape crisis centers, because they were in these situations where they were still doing the work, but they were at home, they weren't getting to see their colleagues, and so they needed ways to connect. And we were able to provide that for them.
So were these remote meetings?
Yeah, everyone was remote, but still holding their client list and still doing the work, but not getting that, that cup of tea moment with their colleagues, not getting to see people, and of course going through lockdown the same as the rest of us and the
Hmm.
stress of that. So yeah, it was a lot of Zoom.
Now, what, I
Um,
mean, let's get more specific here. What about the circle gets you? I mean, I've done circle work. I love it. But for you, share with us, why is it so attractive to you?
Um, I find it has that depth that I've been looking for. Like Circle feels more like being in a poem than being in a workshop or being in a clinical environment. It feels like I can use words like soul in Circle and think, yeah, yeah, these are like my soul is alive here, my
Hmm.
spirit. I feel like it makes space for the quieter parts of myself. Um, and that especially when you're in these roles where maybe you're used to being in a role where you're taking responsibility for things that are happening, or you're supposed to be the person with answers to questions. Circle is beautifully a place where you can have questions, but no one's really looking for an answer, and everybody's holding the space. So it feels healing without feeling clinical, and it feels deeply feminist, which for me is it's so important to like also have those a way of living your politics, if that makes sense. Like I don't want to just read about feminism and spout stuff about it. I want to experience it and live it, and Circle gives me a way of doing that. um,
Now, are you doing it in person also?
we do it in person when I'd say we 80% of our circles are online.
Okay. Now, initially, my thought would be because when you're sitting in a circle with people, there's that feeling of being in a circle, which in and of itself is very powerful. But how do you replicate that online? How does it not just become a bunch of people on a screen?
Yeah, with their well, I think I actually think in some ways online has an advantage. Like they both have their different strengths. What I like about online is so a lot of the people we would be working with might be survivors of sexual harm or relationship abuse. So we're thinking about trauma a lot. I feel like online circles, you can hold that trauma in a different way. I think for some people, it's easier to show up for an online event because you can keep your camera off if you need to. You could just leave
Mhm.
very easily rather than if we'd all come into a room. There's something about boundaries as well. When we have in-person circles, it's almost this question of when does the circle start and when does it close? And you've got all of this conversation happening before and afterwards. Whereas with Zoom, like that boundary is really clear. Like we all arrive and we all leave. And so there's a container that is, the boundaries are different. And then beautifully, you can have people in different time zones in different countries, so it to me, it has a lot of advantages. I've having done both, I find that online circles can be just as intimate. I do wish someone would either tell me about or build some software so our faces could be in a circle
Hmm.
instead of a square.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah.
but beyond that, I find that the intimacy is perfectly possible because it's not a performance, because I think that depth of connection is possible over the phone, it's possible on Zoom, in person. Yeah.
That is such a cool idea to have a software that does that.
I wish I had those skills.
Sounds
Maybe
like
it
a business
exists.
opportunity.
Someone email me.
So you're obviously facilitating these, but it sounds like you're not, for lack of a better expression, you're not doing it in a heavy-handed way. Not that you would anyway, but
Yeah.
talk about that balance of not. How do
Yeah.
you show up?
I try to show up grounded. And I think my process has been one of over time and experience, just trusting the circle and trusting the group more and more. Um, for me, a lot of so I would call it hosting. Facilitation tends to be a word we use, so people recognize that. And I think it's, if you put the invitation out there, if it's your invitation people are responding to, if you're starting and closing things and kind of guiding, then yeah, sure, you're hosting. But in the same way as if you have people over for dinner, you've chosen the menu, but people
Hmm.
are really there for the conversations and the connections, and that's outside of your control. That's about the group. I love the fact that in Circle, I mean, really, yes, I'm hosting it, but I'm also a participant, so I'm sharing as much as anyone else. um I'm showing up as not any kind of expert, just simply the person who put the invitation out there. And I think it's a process of learning to trust the group. And I guess part of those experiences are, you know a Circle, in a way, it can't really go wrong. I think a workshop can go wrong.
Hmm.
I think you could possibly fail at holding a workshop, but I don't think you can fail at hosting a Circle, in a sense of, it's really about the group. And one of the things we have to I think one of the things that makes it Circle is we have a series of agreements, and they really are the shape more than our chairs are the shape.
Hmm.
Um, and we have an agreement which is about trusting that whoever shows up and whatever comes up is as it should be. And I think for me as a host, that's the kind of the ultimate, I'm not supposed to be in control of this. Like, if and it helps if someone's being really quiet, I'm gonna respect the fact that they're really probably honoring their boundaries today. So in a way, they are fully showing up. They're listening
Hmm.
to their own boundaries and their desire to be quiet, and that's what they have today. Um, so yeah, I'm finding I'm getting so much from it myself. It's a
You you
gift.
you talked about doing a circle with people who work with survivors. What might the invitation for them be? You're hosting this party in a sense. What's the invitation say?
It says a lot for that group. I feel like when we're talking about thinking about creating spaces that are trauma informed, and for us, we're always thinking about consent as well and how important that is. I think those two things really go hand in hand. Um, then you're trying to, I think the invitation is key, so that the person entering the space knows what they're entering as much as they're able to without having the experience.
Hmm.
So it's like they've read the menu for dinner, but they've not eaten it yet. But they do know that this is a steakhouse or
Hmm.
it's Asian food. So they need to kind of opt in a way that is feels good for them, especially if they're arriving wondering if this is going to be a space in which they might bring their vulnerabilities. So our invitations would be as explicit and long as possible about how many people might be there, how long it will last. We don't just have random circles. We always have a theme for our circles, and that's really useful again for this client group because we're holding a circle in a few weeks' time on conflict. If you're not in a place where you want to talk about conflict, that would be one to not attend. But
Hmm.
then if you attend, that you've got this knowledge of not just how many people it will be there and how long, but this is what we're going to focus on today. Whereas if we just have a random circle, anything could come up.
Hmm.
So I find that really useful too. And also with people with lived experience of sexual harm, we're always very explicit about disclosure. and what level of disclosure might be appropriate in this group. And we try to discuss that in the group too, if people need any clarification. Sometimes, we don't have too many group spaces. A lot of the support is one-to-one. And so when we do create groups, I think we have
You mean
to,
in our world, generally
I think
speaking?
in the world in general, but certainly in the world of recovering from sexual
Mm.
harm, sexual violence. And so we need to kind of, for a lot of people entering the kinds of spaces we create, they have maybe never consciously met other people who've also were abused in childhood, or, like this is, and certainly maybe the first time they're walking into a room full of these people. So, what's the etiquette?
Hmm.
And what's the etiquette about the one thing, unites you all, which is this experience, some kind of experience. And so we try to hold that, because some people create groups exactly for, like, tell your story and be heard and give it voice, and I think that's great and fine, but that's not what we're creating with our circles. We're creating a space where there's an understanding that there very well might be people with lived experience here, and you might choose to share that you have a lived experience, but this isn't the place to go into details about the nature of that lived experience, because that isn't what other people have, signed up for.
But it is the place for what then?
Connection, I would say, mostly in circle. I feel like, we know that we heal in community. So then if we're interested in being of service to people who are on a healing journey, creating communities feels like an important thing to be doing, rather than, just the one-to-one and then go back to your community. I feel like people, people can be healed by, and get an understanding of their own experience by encountering others. You can kind of see yourself in someone else, or see a struggle that you used to have in someone else. And I think there's in terms of that journey with self-compassion, sometimes that's easier to access through having compassion for others. So I think there's a lot of, like, role modeling, a lot of mirroring, a lot of, and we're talking about harms that are caused in relationship when it comes to sexual harm. Like, I believe some of the things that need to heal can actually only happen in relationship, because, trusting people, trusting
Hmm.
strangers, trusting yourself in a group. It's one thing to learn to trust this professional who's here and you've now had sessions with them. That can be a huge part of someone's journey. It's so important. But how do you trust strangers? How do you trust? So I think that sense of belonging and connection and trust, and watching your own boundaries in a group, what you want to share, what you don't want to share. I feel like that's what Circle is offering people.
So many things.
Right?
I mean, such a natural world of spontaneity as well. I mean, it's almost, I don't want to use the word demanding. That sounds very aggressive, but it almost it really invites someone to be super present.
Yeah, that I think invites is right. There's an invitation in the space. There's an invitation also for silence in the group too, and I think that when you're invited into a space and you've got an understanding of what the center is and what the theme is, there's also an invitation with Circle, like, people are going to share and talk and respond to questions, but we're not going to comment on what they
Mm.
say. Like, I might say thank you to everyone, like, thank you for sharing, but that's it. And I think, sometimes you see this huge amount of relief in people say, oh my God, I don't have to respond. And that can be a skill that people need to work on. I think for people who we do a lot of holding space for professionals in the space. I think for them it could be such a gift. Just, you're not responsible for everyone else here. You're just,
Hmm.
you're part of a group. You can kind of let go of something in this space that you're often holding. And I think then that does bring out a different side of us. This stuff is ancient, right? This
Hmm.
is there's a we find a deep wisdom in circle because it has depth to it. Um, I'm talking to you from Scotland, so our country is littered with stone circles. I can walk to two from my front door. They're
That's amazing.
everywhere. Isn't it awesome? And
Yeah.
like, so we know that our ancient ancestors had some kind of relationship with these spaces, but we don't know what happened there. We need archaeologists to kind of tell us what to guess. We might need to look to folk tales. Maybe we can find some clues there if they're ancient enough. But thank goodness, and with a lot of gratitude to the kind of those indigenous cultures that managed to keep these practices alive
Mm.
despite everything that they had to survive. Um, because now in our modern world, I feel like I'm reconnecting with something in a very modern way, like on Zoom, to something that happened on the hill just up from my house. um, and I'm sure the technicalities of it is different, but the idea of coming together, um, and what happens when we do, I'm sure there's a connection there.
So I know people are listening to this, therapists, coaches, survivors, combination of both, wanting to know or thinking to themselves, oh my God, I want to do this. I want to get involved with this. What's coming up for you? Do you have opportunities? You mentioned you work with providers. What's coming up in terms of your offerings in this space?
So we've always offered to hold circle for organizations for their staff teams and so that they can experience it. But we're just starting to offer circle facilitation training so that those organizations can begin to use circle themselves, with their clients or internally. So we've got online training. We've got our first one in March of this year, but we'll have more through the year. It will
These are
be UK,
live online trainings?
yeah, live
Okay.
online. So UK time zone. But yeah, of course, people could dial in. And there are other places. If you, I think Circle, I feel like it's something that people might begin to see more of. I don't know if it's lockdown or we're really trying to realize how much loneliness there is out there and how
Mm,
healing social connection is. So I would imagine if you search online, you'll find opportunities, and maybe you'll be the person to create the opportunities.
hmm. All right, Nina, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
You can check out our website, which is consentcollective.com. You can email us there at hello@consentcollective.com. You can find me on social media, but these days you're more likely to find me up a mountain than on Twitter. So come
Okay.
to Pitlochry. I'll be easy to bump into. There's not many of us here.
We'll have people send you smoke signals or something.
Yeah,
Well,
that'll work.
well, look, I love talking to you, man. You're just so inspiring, and there's just something so grounded about you. You can feel it. You're welcome back here anytime, and we'll have your links up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Nina, take care.
Thank you, Guy.
All right, bye bye.